The first thing I noticed was the county seal in the corner of the envelope because it did not belong to any county I had ever lived in, visited, worked in, or even driven through. It was sitting in my mailbox on a damp Tuesday evening between a grocery flyer and my electric bill, addressed to me in my full legal name, Lauren Elise Achterberg, at my apartment in Illinois. My name is Lauren Elise Achterberg. At first I thought it was junk mail designed to look official, the kind that tries to scare you into buying insurance or refinancing something you do not own. Then I turned it over, saw the return address from a county treasurer's office in North Carolina, and felt that strange little drop in my stomach that happens before your brain has enough information to know why it is worried. I opened it standing in the hallway with my work bag still on my shoulder. It was a property tax notice for a house on Alder Ridge Lane, a house I had never seen, never purchased, never toured online, never heard mentioned by anyone in my family, and certainly never agreed to own. The notice said the owner of record was Lauren E. Achterberg. It listed a parcel number, an assessed value, and a payment deadline. I remember staring at the page and thinking there had to be another Lauren Achterberg somewhere, even though my last name was unusual enough that I had never met one. I laughed once, because that was easier than panicking, and then I sat down on the bottom stairwell step and read the whole notice again. By the third read, the laughter was gone. The next morning, I called the number printed on the notice as soon as the office opened. I was polite at first, almost apologetic, because I assumed I was about to inconvenience some clerk with a clerical mistake. I explained that I had received a tax bill for a property in their county, but I did not own any property there and had never been involved with that address. The woman on the phone asked for the parcel number. I read it to her. I heard her typing. Then she asked me to verify my full name, current mailing address, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. When I asked why she needed that for a mistake, her tone changed just enough for me to notice. She said the property record showed a mortgage recorded in my name, and the mailing address on file had recently been updated to my Illinois address after a tax notice sent elsewhere had bounced back. My mouth went dry. I asked her what mortgage, and she said she could not give me everything over the phone, but the deed of trust listed my full social security number, my employer, my job title, and an electronic signature matching my name. She read the employer aloud, and it was my actual employer. She read the job title, and it was almost right, but not quite current. She read a salary amount that sounded like my life from 2 years ago, before my promotion. I remember gripping the phone so hard my fingers hurt. I told her very slowly that the signature was not mine because the mortgage was not mine and the house was not mine. She was kind but careful. She told me to contact the mortgage lender, file an identity theft report, and speak with an attorney if I could. Then she said something that made the whole thing feel less like an error and more like a trap. She said the property had been occupied for more than a year, and the mortgage payments appeared to be current. Somebody was living in a house bought under my name, paying just enough to keep the fraud quiet. I did not call my brother right away. That detail matters, because when people hear the end of this story, they sometimes ask why I did not confront him the minute I saw the property was in North Carolina. My younger brother Callum lived in North Carolina. He had moved there 5 years earlier after a divorce, a failed business partnership, and what he always described as a temporary financial rough patch. But North Carolina is a whole state, and I did not yet know the house was connected to him. I had no reason, at least no reason I wanted to admit, to believe my own brother would steal my identity. Callum and I were close, not perfect, not constantly attached, but close in the way siblings can be when they survive a complicated childhood together. Our parents were loving but chaotic, and Callum and I had spent a lot of years translating adult problems for each other before either of us was old enough to do it well. He was funny, charming, and talented at making people feel needed. He called me when his car broke down. He called me when he got good news. He called me when he was lonely. I knew he had money problems, but I knew them the way family often knows things, through vague updates and carefully edited confessions. He had bad credit after the divorce. He had medical bills. He had a business loan that went sideways. He said he was rebuilding. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. And if I am honest, I had spent years treating his financial instability like weather. Stressful, inconvenient, sometimes dangerous, but not malicious. That tax notice was the first time I had to consider that the storm might have been aimed at me. Before I said anything to Callum, I called an attorney. Her name was Priscilla Nakamura, and I found her through a referral from a coworker whose husband handled real estate disputes. I brought the tax notice, a notebook full of dates, and a printed copy of my credit report to her office. I remember how steady she was. She did not gasp. She did not say, "Your own family would never do that," the way a friend might have. She simply asked questions. Had I ever authorized anyone to use my information? No. Had I ever co-signed a loan? No. Had I lost my social security card? No. Had anyone in my family had access to my tax returns, pay stubs, or old employment records? I hesitated there, because the answer was not as clean as I wanted it to be. Years earlier, when my mother had surgery, Callum and I had shared a folder of family documents while arranging bills and insurance paperwork. There were old tax forms in there. I had once emailed Callum a pay stub because he was trying to understand how my health insurance deductions worked compared to his. I had given him more pieces of my life than I realized, never in a way that felt dangerous at the time. Priscilla wrote that down. Then she said we needed documents, not guesses. The first step was to request the mortgage file, the deed records, and anything tied to the application. She warned me that the lender might stall, because lenders do not enjoy admitting they approved a fraudulent loan. She also recommended a forensic document examiner once we had the application, especially if there was a wet signature anywhere or scanned identification. I asked her whether I should call the police immediately. She said yes, but she also said that with family identity theft, timing and documentation mattered. A police report would protect me, but if I accused the wrong person too early, I could lose access to information. That sentence stayed with me. The wrong person. I wanted there to be a wrong person. I wanted there to be some stranger in a basement somewhere, not my brother sitting in a kitchen financed by my stolen name. The next 2 weeks felt like living two lives. In one life, I went to work, answered emails, bought coffee, and told people I was fine. In the other life, I froze my credit, filed an identity theft report with the FTC, opened a police report with my local department, and learned more about mortgage fraud than I ever wanted to know. Priscilla sent formal letters to the lender and county recorder. The county records came first. The deed of trust had my name typed neatly across the top. The property address was on Alder Ridge Lane in a town about 40 minutes from where Callum lived. The loan amount made me feel faint. It was not a small mortgage. It was the kind of debt that could destroy your financial future if it went bad. My signature appeared on multiple pages, but it was not my signature. Whoever had written it knew the shape of my name, but not the pressure, not the rhythm, not the way I crossed the T in Octoberg with a line that always slants down. My driver's license number was listed, but the copy attached to the file was blurry, almost too blurry, and the photograph looked like it had been compressed into uselessness. The employment verification letter was the part that made Priscilla lean back in her chair and go quiet for a few seconds. It was printed on letterhead that looked like my company's old template, the one we had stopped using after a rebrand. It listed my old job title, my salary before my promotion, and the name of a supervisor who had left the company 18 months earlier. Those details were not random. A stranger might have bought my social security number somewhere. A stranger might have found my address. But the old job title, the outdated supervisor, the former letterhead, those were details from my real life, frozen at a particular point in time. They were accurate enough to pass a lazy review and outdated enough to point to someone who knew me personally but did not have current access. Priscilla looked at me and asked who in my life would know those things from around 2 years earlier. I said Callum's name before I had time to stop myself. The forensic document examiner, a patient man named Dr. Bell, confirmed what my gut already knew about the signatures. They were traced or imitated, not naturally written by me. He explained that the forger had focused on the overall appearance of my name but had missed the internal movement, the pauses, the starting points. He compared the mortgage signatures to samples from my lease, my bank forms, and a handwritten note I had given Priscilla permission to use. His report used careful language, but the meaning was clear. I had not signed those documents. The employment verification was worse. My company confirmed in writing that the letter was not issued by them. The HR contact listed had never worked there, and the salary information did not match my current records. The letter had just enough truth to look legitimate. That was the theme of the whole fraud. Enough truth to get through a door. Enough familiarity to avoid suspicion. Around that same time, Priscilla recommended a private investigator named Marisol Vance. I resisted at first because hiring a private investigator sounded dramatic, expensive, and like something people did in movies when they already knew their family had betrayed them. Priscilla did not push. She just said, "We need to know who is occupying the property and who is making the payments. The lender may tell us eventually, but eventually is not a strategy." So I hired Marisol. She was direct, efficient, and completely unmoved by my emotional spiraling, which I came to appreciate. She started with public records, utility connections, delivery traces where legally available, and neighborhood verification. She did not break laws or do anything theatrical. She just followed ordinary records with more discipline than an ordinary person could manage while shaking with anger. The first update came in a short call. Utilities at Alder Ridge Lane were not in my name, they were in Callum's. My brother's full name, Callum James Achterberg. I sat on my couch with the phone pressed to my ear and stared at the tax notice on my coffee table. Marisol kept talking, saying she still needed to verify occupancy and payment patterns, but I barely heard her. The house was not just near him, it was his. He was living there. Under my mortgage, under my debt, under my name. I did something then that I am not proud of but still understand. I called him, not to confront him, not yet, but because the shock needed somewhere to go. He answered on the third ring, cheerful and distracted. Hey, Lore, what's up? I almost said, are you in my house? Instead, I asked how he was. He talked for 10 minutes about work, about a neighbor's dog barking at night, about how he was finally feeling more stable. He mentioned fixing a leaky sink. He said, it's nice to have a place that feels like mine. I pressed my nails into my palm until the skin stung. I asked, your rental? There was the smallest pause. Then he said, yeah, basically. Rent-to-own kind of situation. Complicated paperwork. You know how it is. I did not know how it was. I knew exactly how it was beginning to look, but I swallowed the question and let him keep lying. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. That was the moment grief entered the situation. Before that, I had been frightened, angry, confused. But hearing his familiar voice glide around the truth made me grieve something I had not realized could die in the middle of a phone call. Trust does not always break with a shout. Sometimes it breaks in a pause that lasts half a second too long. Marisol's full report arrived 5 days later. Callum was the sole occupant of the Alder Ridge Lane property. Neighbors identified him as the owner, or at least as the man who told them he owned it. Mortgage payments had been made from an account connected to him, not me. The down payment had come through a cashier's check tied to a local credit union where he banked. There were no signs that anyone else was behind it. He had used my identity to qualify because his own credit history would not support the loan. He had then made every payment himself, which explained why the fraud had stayed hidden. If that property tax notice had not been redirected to my real address after some mailing problem, I might not have known until he missed payments, tried to sell, or the IRS noticed something strange. I might have walked into a car dealership years later and discovered I could not get a loan because my debt-to-income ratio included a house I had never seen. I might have been sued. I might have lost savings defending myself. The fact that he had paid on time did not make it harmless. It made it controlled. It made it deliberate. When I read the report, I thought about all the calls where he had asked me little questions that seemed innocent. What was the exact name of your employer now? Did you ever keep copies of old tax returns? Is your middle name on your driver's license? I had answered because he was my brother. I had answered because I trusted the context. Looking back, I could not tell which conversations were normal and which were fishing expeditions. That uncertainty was almost as painful as the fraud itself, because it spread backward through years of memories and stained them. I met Priscilla the next morning. She told me we had enough to confront him, but she wanted the confrontation documented as carefully as possible. She did not tell me to record him secretly, because laws vary and she was precise about that. Instead, she advised me to keep the conversation in writing if I could or have a witness present. I knew Callum would not confess over text. He was too slippery when he had time to craft words. So I asked him to meet me at a quiet coffee shop halfway between the airport and his town. I told him I was coming through North Carolina for work. That was a lie, and it made me feel sick, but by then I was done protecting the clean shape of our relationship while he lived inside the mess he had made. I flew down on a Friday morning with Priscilla's folder in my carry-on. The whole flight, I kept thinking about us as children. Callum at 8 years old, slipping me the last cookie because I had cried after a bad day at school. Callum at 17, sitting on the hood of my first car, promising we would never turn into the kind of family that only called when someone needed money. Callum at 35, signing my name to a mortgage application. People like to imagine betrayal as a switch, one clear before and after. But on that plane, I could not separate the brother who loved me from the brother who used me. They were the same person, and that made the confrontation harder, not easier. He arrived late to the coffee shop, wearing a navy jacket I had given him for Christmas. He hugged me before I could decide whether to let him. I stood there stiffly, and he noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked. I took the folder from my bag and placed the property tax notice on the table between us. His face did not collapse immediately. That was the first thing I noticed. He looked at it, then at me, and tried confusion. "What's this?" I said, "You tell me." He picked it up and squinted like the address meant nothing to him. I gave him one chance. I said, "Callum, before I open the rest of this folder, I need you to tell me why there is a mortgage in my name on the house where you live." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the coffee shop. "Too many people," he said. I almost laughed. Too many people was his concern, not the forged signature, not the debt, not the fact that I had spent weeks wondering whether my life was being quietly dismantled. He said he did not know what I was talking about. He said maybe there had been a paperwork mix-up. He said he had a friend who helped him with housing documents, and maybe something got crossed. Each explanation was thinner than the last. I opened the folder. I showed him the mortgage application, the forged signature, the fake employment verification, the utility record, the payment trace. Marisol's occupancy summary, Dr. Bell's signature analysis. I did not raise my voice. I wanted to, but I had promised myself I would keep the center of the conversation cold and clear. I said, "My attorney has all of this. The lender is being notified. The police report is already open. I am asking you one more time to tell me the truth." That was when he stopped performing confusion and started performing injury. He leaned back like I had slapped him. "Lauren, I was desperate." Those were his first honest words, and even then they were arranged to make him the wounded person in the room. He said his credit was ruined after the divorce. He said he had been sleeping on a friend's couch. He said renting was eating him alive. He said every lender treated him like trash. He said he knew he could make the payments, and he had made them, every single one. So what was the actual damage? I remember that phrase because it landed in me like a stone. What was the actual damage? I said, "You made me liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars without my consent." He said, "But you weren't paying it." I said, "You forged my signature." He said, "I didn't think of it like that." I said, "You fabricated my employment verification." He said, "I had to get through underwriting somehow." I said, "You stole my identity." He covered his face with both hands. For a moment, I saw the little brother again, the one who used to cry when he knew he had gone too far. Then he looked up and said, "I was going to tell you once I refinanced. It was always temporary." Temporary is another word people use when they want to make a crime sound like a bridge. But the mortgage had been active for more than a year. He had not told me when he closed. He had not told me when he moved in. He had not told me when we talked about Thanksgiving plans or Mom's birthday or my promotion. He had only planned to tell me if telling me became useful or unavoidable. I asked how he got my information. He admitted to pieces, not all at once. The old pay stub I had emailed him, a scan of my driver's license from the family document folder, my social security number from an old tax document he had access to when we handled our mother's medical paperwork, details from conversations, details from trust. He kept saying he never meant to hurt me. I told him intention did not change liability. He asked if I was really going to ruin his life over paperwork. That was the closest I came to losing control. I told him, "You used my life as paperwork." He went quiet then, maybe because he finally understood. Maybe because he had no better defense. I left before the conversation could turn into bargaining. In the parking lot, he followed me and asked what I wanted him to do. I said, "Refinance it in your own name or surrender the house and cooperate fully with removing me from every record." He said that would take time. I said he had already had more than a year of my time without permission. Then I got in my rental car and shook so hard I had to wait 20 minutes before I could drive. After that meeting, the process became less emotional but more exhausting. Priscilla sent the lender a formal dispute package with the forensic signature report, my identity theft affidavit, the police report number, my employer's denial of the verification letter, and Marisol's findings showing Callum's occupancy and payment history. The lender's first response was cautious and self-protective. They said they would investigate. They said they took fraud seriously. They said I should continue monitoring my credit. Priscilla responded with more force than I could have managed on my own. She pointed out the underwriting failures, the outdated employment verification, the blurry identification copy, the mismatched signature, and the fact that payments were coming from someone other than the named borrower. She made it clear that if they tried to hold me responsible for a fraudulent mortgage after receiving proof, the next conversation would not be friendly. Meanwhile, Callum called me constantly. I did not answer most of the calls. When I did communicate, I kept it in text or email. He alternated between apologies and resentment. One message would say he was ashamed and would fix everything. The next would say I did not understand what it was like to be trapped by bad credit. I wanted to scream that bad credit was not a license to steal from your sister. Instead, I forwarded everything to Priscilla. My parents found out because Callum told them a version in which he had made a mistake with paperwork, and I was threatening legal action. My mother called me crying. She asked if there was any way to settle it privately. I told her as gently as I could that private was how he had gotten away with it. My father was quieter. He asked one question. Did he forge your name? I said yes. My father sighed, and in that sigh I heard a lifetime of watching Callum turn consequences into negotiations. He said, then he has to fix it. Not you. That helped more than he probably knew. Family fraud has a special cruelty because it recruits everyone around it. Suddenly, you are not only defending yourself from the person who harmed you, but also from the emotional pressure of people who want the family story to stay comfortable. They want a misunderstanding. They want a lesson learned. They want a solution where nobody has to say words like forgery, police report, identity theft. But those words were the truth. Refusing to say them would not make me kinder. It would only make me easier to use. The lender's investigation took almost 2 months. During that time, Priscilla made sure written notices went to the credit bureaus, the county recorder, the title company, and the mortgage servicer. I learned to keep a binder on my kitchen table with tabs for everything: tax notice, mortgage application, forensic report, police report, lender correspondence, credit bureau letters, county documents, Callum communications. It became the ugliest scrapbook in the world, a record of my brother's choices and my attempt to separate my life from them. I checked my credit every week. I checked my mail like it might bite me. I stopped answering unknown numbers. Sleep became unreliable. Some nights I would wake at 3 a.m. thinking about interest rates, foreclosure notices, and whether some automated system somewhere still believed I owned a house in North Carolina. My friends tried to be supportive, but even they sometimes stumbled into minimizing it. At least he paid, one said before catching herself. I knew what she meant. She meant it could have been worse, and it could have. But I had started to hate that phrase, because worse is not the standard for whether something is wrong. He did not drain my bank account. He did not disappear. He did not default. But he made a secret bet with my future and signed my name to it. That was enough. Eventually, the lender gave Callum 2 options. He could refinance the property independently, using his own name and his own financial profile, or he could surrender the property through a process that would remove my name and unwind the fraudulent loan. By then, his financial situation had improved. He had a steadier job, more income, and ironically a payment history on a mortgage he never should have had. He fought the refinance at first because the rate would be worse and the costs were high. Priscilla told his attorney, because by then he had finally hired one, that his preferences were not my problem. The mortgage had to come off my name completely, and the credit reporting had to be corrected. Those were the non-negotiable terms. Callum eventually refinanced. I did not attend the closing, but I waited by my phone that entire day like a person waiting for medical test results. When Priscilla called and said the new loan had funded in his name and the fraudulent mortgage was being released, I cried with relief so sudden it embarrassed me, even though I was alone. The county records took a little longer to update. The credit bureaus took longer still. But the legal liability was removed. My name came off the mortgage. The lender issued a letter acknowledging that I had disputed the loan as identity fraud and would not be responsible for the debt. My credit reports were corrected. The property tax record was updated. The binder on my kitchen table slowly became less active and more archival, though I could not bring myself to put it away for months. The police case did not turn into the dramatic criminal ending some people expect. Because the lender chose to resolve the loan through refinance, and because I prioritized removing my liability, the criminal side moved slowly and quietly. Callum was not dragged out of his house in handcuffs. There was no courtroom confession. Real life often denies you the clean scene your anger wants. There were consequences, though. He had to refinance at his own cost. He had to pay legal fees. He had to sign acknowledgments through attorneys. He had to explain enough to our parents that the comfortable version of him cracked. And he lost the thing he had counted on most, which was my automatic trust. After the refinance closed, Marisol called to wrap up her investigation. She said something I still think about. She told me family identity fraud follows a different pattern than stranger identity theft, because strangers often have data, but family has context. A stranger might know your social security number. A sibling might know where you worked 2 years ago, what your old signature looked like, which supervisor's name would sound believable, how likely you are to avoid conflict, and which emotional buttons to press if they are caught. That was exactly what made Callum's fraud so effective. It was not sophisticated because he was a criminal mastermind. It was sophisticated because he knew me. He knew I trusted him enough not to question old requests. He knew I would hesitate before accusing him. He knew I would worry about the family impact. He built the fraud out of paperwork, yes, but also out of my love for him. That realization changed me. I became more private, more careful, more willing to disappoint people who asked for access they did not need. I froze my credit permanently unless I was actively applying for something. I stopped sending documents casually. I separated family compassion from financial exposure. Those may sound like small changes, but for me, they marked the end of an old way of living. I had believed closeness meant openness. Now I believe closeness without boundaries can become a weapon in the wrong hands. Callum and I did not speak for several months after everything was resolved. He sent apologies. Some were better than others. The early ones still had excuses tucked into them, little hooks about desperation and embarrassment and how he had always planned to fix it. I ignored those. The first apology I answered was the one where he wrote, "I used being your brother to get past what you would never have given me as a borrower." That sentence was ugly, but it was true, and truth was the only place any repair could begin. We met again nearly a year after the tax notice arrived, this time at my request and in my city. I chose a public park, not a coffee shop, because I did not want to sit across a table from him like we were negotiating. He looked older. I probably did too. He said he was in counseling. He said he had paid down other debts. He said the house was still his, now legally, and he understood that every payment he made did not erase what he had done before. I told him I was glad he understood that, but understanding was not restoration. He asked if I hated him. I said no, and that was true. Hate would have been simpler. I loved him, but the love had changed shape. It no longer came with unlocked doors. It no longer assumed he would protect me just because we shared a childhood. I told him I would not lend him money, co-sign anything, share financial documents, or keep secrets from attorneys to protect his reputation. He nodded. He cried a little. I did not comfort him the way I once would have. That was hard, but it was necessary. Rebuilding a relationship after betrayal is not one grand forgiving moment. It is a long series of smaller decisions where the person who caused the harm does not get to set the pace. Callum and I speak now, but less often. The conversations are more careful. Sometimes they are warm. Sometimes they ache. He sends me photos of repairs he has made to the house, and I still feel a complicated twist in my chest when I see the place. It is a modest house with gray siding, a small porch, and a maple tree near the driveway. There is nothing sinister about it from the outside. That almost bothers me more. It looks like a normal home because, to everyone else, it is one. To me, it is the building where my brother stored a lie in my name. I have never visited it. I do not know if I ever will. Maybe someday I will be able to stand on that porch and feel nothing but distance from what happened. Maybe not. What I do know is that I am no longer legally tied to it, and that matters. My name is mine again in the places where paperwork can prove it. The harder work has been making my name feel like mine again inside my own family. If there is one thing I wish I had understood earlier, it is that identity theft does not always arrive from a faceless stranger. Sometimes it arrives wearing a familiar jacket you bought for Christmas. Sometimes it knows your mother's surgery date, your old boss's name, and the way you sign birthday cards. Sometimes it says it was only trying to survive, but survival that requires stealing someone else's future is not survival. It is harm, and paying the bill on time does not turn stolen consent into consent. That property tax notice looked like a mistake when I first opened it. It turned out to be the only reason I found the truth before the damage became permanent. I still think about how easily I could have thrown it in a drawer assuming the county would fix itself. I still think about how many people might be carrying debts they do not know about because the person who betrayed them was careful enough to keep the payments current. So if something official arrives with your name on it and your gut tells you it is wrong, do not ignore it. Ask questions. Get records. Put things in writing. Protect yourself even if the trail leads somewhere you do not want to go, especially then. Because love can make you patient, but it should never make you available for fraud. That is my story. My brother used my identity to buy a house I had never seen, and for a while he believed that making the payments meant he had not really stolen anything from me. It took a tax notice, an attorney, a forensic document examiner, a private investigator, and a very painful confrontation to prove otherwise and force him to carry his own debt in his own name. I am still learning what forgiveness can look like when trust does not fully return, and I would honestly like to know what you would have done if a sibling had used your name this way and then asked you to understand. Share your thoughts, because stories like this are more common inside families than people want to admit. Thank you for listening, and if you want more real stories about betrayal, accountability, and rebuilding your life after someone close crosses a line, subscribe for the next one. Take care of yourself, protect your name, and I will see you in the next story.